to this Unshrink event. This is Unshrink in practice. The Unshrink community is focused on loss prevention. And while we are very, very interested and involved in the practice of loss prevention, and we're intrigued by the new technologies and new ways of working, we're also very, very focused on the people and the experiences that exist in the loss prevention community. Lots and lots of other communities exist, obviously, but we want ours to be focused on the people and their experiences. Because, to be honest with you, if you've been in this profession long enough, you've got some stories to tell. So the format that we've put together is one where people can come together and share their experiences, and hopefully have some lively and engaging conversations along the way. Just before we begin, a few housekeeping notes. We are recording this. We will be recording and chopping up this session and posting it out onto various platforms. If you type the word Unshrink into LinkedIn or to wherever you get or listen to your podcasts, you will find various recordings and pieces of material dotted around the place. We have a community on LinkedIn, a group page, which we heartily encourage you to join in and participate in. If you'd like to be involved in future events, you can use that to reach out to us if you want to tell your own stories. But as far as today is concerned, we are recording. We want to hear from you, but I think maybe better for all of us if we avoid specifics, let's say, if we avoid particular times and places and incidents and keep the conversation general. Our panel today, we have a very experienced panel. We have joining us from SCI, one of my colleagues, Paul Dennis. Many of you know Paul. He has worked for a long time in the retail industry as a retailer, but also as a technology supplier. So he's ridden both sides of both of those horses. He's had a long and varied career and has many, many interesting stories. He understands retail and the technology involved like almost nobody else. Along with Paul today, Paul will be speaking with Andrew Rees. Andrew has been in loss prevention for a long time and has seen it from many different sides and many different angles, from luxury retail to all the way into grocery retail as well. And as he understands the technology, he's a no-nonsense kind of guy. So I hope we have a no-nonsense kind of a conversation. So without any further ado, I'm going to hand it over to our panel, and you'll get much more out of listening to Paul and Andrew than you will out of listening to me. If there are any questions, please feel free to put them up on the Q&A panel. We'll be able to deal with those questions, queue them up at the end. If you're feeling brave, we can even join you to get you up on the virtual stage if you like to ask the question in person. So all of that being said, let me hand over to Paul and to Andrew.
Right, thanks, Chris. Could we the first slide? So, for those who don't know SCI, I'll kind of capture what we're about in one quick headline, which this slide pretty much does anyway. Before I really start, though, I guess thanks, Andrew, for joining us today. It's good to see you again. It's been a while through lockdown and the rest. But what I want to talk about first, I guess, is our mission, our mantra, or whatever SCI was trying to do. So we're trying to, on a mission, I guess, to help reveal areas of loss in retail that are currently not measurable. And our thinking there is that if we can do that, we can provide information for retailers to help them choose which areas they might tackle in store or invest in further. So ultimately, they can start to reduce shrink. And we like to do that through technology, which is the platform that Chris mentioned kind of already. So I guess my first question to you, Andrew, on this one is in that view of providing retailers with more information so they can make better decisions towards shrink, What's your take on that, and how significant of a value is that in the real world?
Okay, well, I think firstly, it's good that we're starting this topic because I think, we all understand and we all know that as we now live in a data-led society, be that with what you do at home, what you do in work, what you do in your leisure time, everything or most things now are data-led. From a retail perspective, data is critical. It's not only does it help you shape your strategy, does it shape your spending, does it shape how you set your teams up, how you retail things. It is absolutely critical. Specifically from a shrink perspective, I know certainly through my career, I have very much moved over the last 15 years to being what I used to class as intelligence led. So that be whether it's through investigation, whether it's through how I invest the budget, areas that we focus on, areas that we don't focus on. So everything is data led. So, from a initial perspective, it is critical. Also, these days, again, more than any time, you have to demonstrate the benefit of what you've done, how you're spending money, where you're placing your strategy, and data is critical in that as well. So the fact that you can demonstrate to your stakeholders, to your customers, to everybody that what you're doing is the right thing to be doing and that you are getting the best bang for your buck.
Okay, thank you. So on that point, we've got the next picture, Chris. I think it's coming through. So on shrink in general, how much of an impact in stores is shrink? What does it really mean?
This is something you may have to manage me on because this is something I could talk about for hours because it has an impact on a whole range of different things. So obviously when you think about shrink, the first thing that comes to mind is the economic loss. So different companies will have different handles on it. They will have different acceptable levels of shrink. They'll have different areas of shrink. But at the end of the day, shrink is still a loss or unaccounted loss, be it through malicious or non-malicious loss, still unaccounted loss, and does ultimately come completely off the bottom line. So therefore, if it comes off the bottom line, it comes off the profit. So first thing people think about is the fact of it's an economic loss. What I think companies are catching up with now is the fact of there's also shrink as a massive consequential loss as well. So it's not just direct money off the profit line. It's other areas as well. It's areas around the fact of more often than not now shrink or loss through theft involves violence. Violence then itself has a whole different raft of areas of consequence. So there's areas around staff morale, staff absence, staff turnover, all kinds of areas because as violence increases, therefore safety of your staff increases. That has a massive effect. It also, of course, has an effect on the fact of you do not have enough back to the economic perspective. It's about does it falter you being able to invest in other areas? So there's money coming off the bottom line. There's less money to spend, less money for development, for all kinds of things which happen on the social side as well. So shrink itself has a massive impact in stores. I say not just on the economic side, but also on the general feeling and investment into the company.
Exactly. Okay, thank you. So I'm going to move on, I guess, to a good point, a good segue into stores themselves and the challenges for stores from everyday, day to day. From we used to sit, I guess, in our, I don't want to say ivory towers from an operational point of view, but unless you walk the walk like someone like you have, it can be very different. So from a store's perspective, what stops shrink being reduced?
Again, this is something that I could talk about for a long time because there are many aspects to what can prevent or reduce shrink. But for me, I think if you want to kind of put it all into more of a kind of a capture all, for me, the biggest thing that prevents the reduction in shrink is acceptance of shrink. So there's lots of companies, lots of places where I have worked of witnessed that really do not think they have an issue with shrink. So, they believe that, yes, okay, I know this happens here, I know that happens there, but that doesn't happen in my company. We don't have thieves coming into our company. We don't have staff or colleagues that steal from us. We don't have supply that steal from us. That doesn't happen. So that's not something that I need to worry about. So I think acceptance is the biggest part of it. Once you accept the fact that you've got shrink and you understand the bits around where, how, when, who, and why do I have shrink, who's stealing from me, is it process-led, is it malicious-led, is it non-malicious? And you get to that stage, and once you understand it and accept it, you can start looking at what I call the 3 M's. So the 3 M's have always been the basics of what I've done and the way that I've laid my strategy, and that is around measure, monitor, and manage. So once you know what the shrink is, you can measure it. And by that, again, it's a big capital, but you can measure where, how, who, when, why. So you can measure all that. By that, then you can start monitoring where your areas of loss are, particularly your high shrink areas, and we'll come back onto that later on. And you can then start to manage it. So you can manage your investment, your focus, your resource, everything into those areas. But for me, until you start accepting that you have an issue, and I think if anybody's still in a position now where they don't believe they have it, they have a much bigger problem than they think they're going to have. But once you know what it is, you can then start to understand it, monitor it, manage it, and start facing into the problem.
That's good. Okay, I mean, that's exactly the point. It makes us feel better because I guess having data to provide stores information, so we do have them decisions to make is exactly what we're trying to do. So that's good. When you're in stores or looking at how to tackle that or start, I guess what are the big areas that take up all the operational time in stores for shrink reduction?
I think again that kind of goes back to the 3 M's I discussed earlier on. So once you understand it, the monitoring, the managing it, and measuring it definitely take up a lot of time. There is the best experience I've had in relation to how you go around minimizing shrink has always been around the fact of you engage your strategy is not just a loss prevention strategy. It's a company strategy. It's really important, I find. Again, I've always tried to engender the philosophy that shrink is not just for security, or theft is not just for security, it's everybody. So it's very much, it's a big part of making sure that the culture is right within the business. So there is the acceptance, there is the desire to face into it, and there is the acceptance that this is all one team. There is, again, if you look at the way that all businesses and retailing particularly are moving, efficiency is the name of the game, which is why technology is very much at the forefront of what's going on, is because efficiency is the name of the game. Once you're operating as a business, there's only certain areas that you can make, where you can increase that profit, and that is obviously increase the sales, reduce the costs, or reduce the shrinkage. Those are the main areas. So the good companies are the people with the very progressive and realistic view of shrink, create the store culture. So therefore there is tasks, there will be processes that need to be put into place, but that does take time. That does take time and know-how and education. But if you do those things properly, it becomes a part of the culture and therefore second nature. That is when you start to make real progress into it.
Yeah, and experience helps. I won't say how much you've got, or anyone can look on LinkedIn and see some of the years. It's a lot, everybody, but I won't bash there. But through that, you must have seen, in retail, we love a measure. We love a KPI to hit, a target, a weekly one, whatever it be, across all different areas in store. You must have seen a lot change, over the years. So what measures are stores encouraged to hit for shrink?
Again, it depends on the nature of the retailer. If for example, that my background has been in fashion retail and in grocery. Now, shrink is a universal phrase, or loss, or unaccounted, whatever you want to label it as. It is across retail. but it varies. Within fashion retail, you have far less focus or far less impact on process. Right. Within grocery, as you know, process is probably still the biggest area of shrink creation, because it's fresh food, there's shelf life, there's all that type of thing that that is different to being in the fashion retail. So it is around understanding what is the causes of shrink that you have in your business, and understanding that side of it. Once you have that, so once you have that understanding, it's a bit then about setting your measures. And there will always be the kind of generic measures within any form of retail, and that will be around, shrink reduction will be the first one. So there will always be the piece around, you will always be challenged around shrink reduction. Depending where you are, some retailers are still quite, should we say, traditional in the fact of they will measure arrests. I always prefer to measure deters as opposed to arrests, because you get just as much information from stopping somebody doing something as opposed to waiting until they do it and then deal with them, plus the time-saving factor. I think it's also that it's really important to measure the consequential impact in stores. So you measure the violent incidents, you measure the amount of police reports that are put through, because again, going back to data and the things that I would always expect from stores is I always used to say that you would get the necessary support into your store if you give me the necessary information. So whilst they might see it as an added task to report all the incidents that happen in store, for me, it is critical. You have to have a very clear picture of exactly what's going on in each particular store, each particular area, to enable you to supply the appropriate resource to support them in their role, to go back to as all part of the 3 M's in kind of managing, monitoring and measuring. You've got to have that information in. So for me, it was always that. But again, it's almost if you're reverse engineering it, where data, as we touched on right at the beginning, is critical, and data that you feed back to feed into your dynamic risk metrics is just as important. And as I used to do it, it's again, when you talk about data and you talk about what stores can do and what you expect them to do, for me, a lot of the time it's just as important of what wasn't there, what was there. So it's important to look at where the gaps are through the data, as well as what the data is telling you.
Okay. That's almost as if you've clued that up, but I'm sure everyone you haven't. But I'm going to move on to technology now. And I don't get too controversial for anyone else who knows a lot more about CCTV and things like that than certainly that I do. But we'll start off with the obvious question, I guess. CCTV in stores, a really common thing. We all see it. Gets accused of being wallpaper when it's on screens and things like that in entrances. But CCTV, is it effective?
In a nutshell, my opinion is yes. However, I would add on to that the fact of CCTV in itself is just the start of it. One of the big allies that we have in loss prevention these days, and in truth be told, the amount of allies that we have been reduced or worn away over the last few years. But one of the big allies you have is technology. So CCTV, yes, it's very effective, but then it's what you do with that information. How is that? Do you attach analytics to it? Do you attach actions to it? What do you do? Because CCTV in itself, so just having a camera in an aisle or having a camera as you walk through a store or a monitor is simply not enough. I did, in the last few years, I spent a lot of time out with people through a university in the north of England and West Yorkshire Police. I spent numerous days out with people who claim to be ex-professional shoplifters. They were always interesting when I used to spend days out with them, where they kept on slipping from when I used to. But that aside, it was a real eye opener. I went out with them, and I would talk to them about what would prevent them going into stores, what really worries them about, which we'll come on to later on. But they, to a person, and I spent time with about 20 of them, to a person, they all said the actual presence of CCTV cameras does not worry them in the slightest. It's
Right.
what happens with it afterwards. Because they would say to me, look, well, the CCTV there, but more often than not, there's nobody looking at it. So what's the point? But when I went on to explain about if you went into analytics and when you came in, it would, we would know that it was you and what you did, and then it certainly starts to give them a different perception of what's going on, because that then creates a consequence. Whereas a camera stand on a wall does not have a consequence.
Yeah. Okay. So what makes it more effective in still?
It's a phrase I always used to use. So, well, I say always, over the last 15 years. Whereas as technology moved on within retail or in the world in general, there's lots of clever stuff that technology can do, and it's getting more and more realistic. But I found that you got more benefit out of it by making it very clear what you had and what it could do. So as an example, it started off in the very early days when I worked in a very high-end fashion store in the Knightsbridge area of London, which has lots of lights on it without giving names. And one of the things that we used to do is that when thieves were caught, we would take them into the CCTV room and show them exactly what CCTV was there. Now, I know these days with the advent of GDPR, et cetera, data protection, probably not those sort of things would not be permitted. But the principle, even as things have developed, I've always lived under the belief that, or the principle that, if you've got a dog, show people you've got the dog, because that then helps to become far more of a deterrent. So if people know what your CCTV actually does and the analytics and the information it creates, who's watching it, they're watching it in this area, they're watching it, that then creates far more of a culture of understanding, shall we say. So that if people know that you've got a dog, then they won't come and see the dog.
They do, yeah. I think to quote Adrian Beck, I don't know whether it's I can't see the whole list there, but if you're there, hello, Adrian. It's all about that respect, I guess, amplification of risk, and making people think you got something, and the likelihood I might get caught will be higher. So in that respect, I guess is there a gap now, though, in technology? Like you're saying, you had to take someone in there into the back room and kind of go, look what I've got, I can see you. Is there a gap now in technology, though, that could save stores a lot of effort?
I think there'll always be a gap in technology. It doesn't matter how much technology moves on, there will always be a gap. There'll always be, because there'll always be a requirement for development. And that's the kind of way that I see it, is that whilst there is an increasing amount of technology that is available out to a retailer or to anybody, for me, the trick or the gap has always been about being realistic. When I've sat in different positions, and the amount of times that people come in to basically sell the emperor's new clothes to me, and either it's unrealistic what they're talking about, or we're talking about technology that works extremely well in a lab-based scenario, but when you bring it into the real world, so you've got thousands of people or hundreds of people walking past it on a daily basis. You get the light changing on a day, almost by the minute. So there's all these different external influences on this technology, and a lot of the time as well, the people that perhaps that you would be interested in from a targeted perspective don't always do what you want them to do. So it's important that I think you keep that realistic. And also, one of the biggest things for me from a realism perspective is that you can put in all this technology into stores, which, some of it will work because you will work with the developers to make sure that it is targeting what you wanted to do and all that. But at the end of the day, more often than not, it will go back to one individual. So all this technology, all the capability of the technology and all the clever stuff that it does will always have a weakest link in the chain. And more often than not, with no disrespect to anybody, that could end up going back to a security officer on a door, a security officer in a monitoring station, who then has to make further decisions on it. So for me, there is that would be the gap, because there's still, you have to have human intervention at some stage. And that's where the gap is. So we need more prescriptive outputs. So this is happening, do exactly this, as opposed this is happening, do what your instinct tells you. It needs to be more prescriptive actions.
So kind of action-based results rather than just monitoring. Okay.
Absolutely, yeah.
We've seen certainly the capability of machine learning and new approaches that we're looking at through computer vision are moving really fast. The pace of technology now, even I guess, I don't want to mention the pandemic, but since the pandemic has accelerated a lot of these things and technologies, things are moving at a frightening pace. And we see very different areas in stores behaving different ways through the footage that we see. So that means our data models have to work slightly differently. But from an NLP perspective, are there any particular areas around stores that are the hardest to monitor, or does Shrink thrive in certain areas in stores?
Again, I think that goes back to my earlier point, depending what form of retailing you're in. Yes, there will always be, there'll always be a challenge to maintain the appropriate focus in the right areas, because Shrink's dynamic as well. You know, if you're talking about theft in particular, there's certain products or certain areas that, for want of a better word, are fashionable. You know, there'll always be the steadfast areas. So there'll always be the vodka. There'll always be the meat. There'll always be these types of areas. There'll always be the high value labeled clothing. That will always be there. But it's dynamic. So it's about understanding exactly what is currently your high risk areas, what are your emerging areas, and what are your potential areas. For me, that is always the part. There's always a bit as well around, traditionally, we will always focus on the shop floor itself. You know, and that isn't the only area. One of the kind of early advancements, obviously, with technology was, or is, perpetual inventory. Now, from an efficiency perspective, perpetual inventory is brilliant. However, from a Shrink perspective, or from someone perhaps with nefarious ideas, PI is also a dream for those, because it takes a perpetual inventory. So therefore, a product will come into your business, no matter what it is, from a supplier all the way through your supply chain, out onto your shop floor, and then maybe once or twice a year through stock taking or inventory, you will find that this particular item has gone, right? But everybody seems to understandably thinks, well, if this has gone missing, it has gone from the shop floor, because that just manifested itself through inventory. But so therefore, this must be where the problem is. However, you know, there's also a big backstream around where it could have gone from. So, but from an LP perspective, it's been able to understand exactly what goes on backstream or upstream, I should say, from the shop floor. So that for me is a big gap, because the technology, certainly from my experience, is very much focused on what's happening on the shop floor, what's happening at the point of sale, not necessarily to back of house, supply chain, warehousing, suppliers, all that sort of thing. So I think there's still some massive room to be done there.
Yeah, which goes back to, I guess, your acceptance of the problem and you know, facing into it and making a decision to do something. Yeah, okay.
The other point for me as well, Paul, is which I think is critical, from kind of being able to understand where your emerging threats are and your potential threats. It's around working collaboratively. So it's really important that, you know, that you don't just, yes, we know that within retail there are competitive advantage in lots of things, but in the vast majority of stuff in relation to loss prevention and Shrink, there's no real loss of competitive advantage by sharing experiences. So I know certainly when I worked in the grocery industry, I used to meet very regularly and discuss a lot of things with the other security people in the grocery effect. And I know that happens in all other areas, because it's important that you bring your learnings and your understanding to that, and also learn from them, because very often you will hit on a theme or a particular area. We thought, I haven't really looked at that within my business, but if they're having it, you can probably bet your bottom dollar we are. So let's go back and look at that from our side as well. So working collaboratively, both with competitors and also increasingly more important with technology providers, to me is critical.
Okay, thank you. That's exactly, to be honest, why we do things like this today. And Chris heads, you know, the Unshrink community, so we can build it and talk more. I'm going to bring back away from technology again now and go back into, I guess, our last set. And I hope everyone can see this, but around more what can be done. Now, the picture there in the very top corner at the left of all the people happy is, of course, how every meeting that you and I had, Andrew, together, you'd be sat in LP, I'd be looking at, I guess, efficiency from an operations point of view, and we never disagreed, and that's exactly how Shrink works. So on that point, though, what challenges do you find in finding consensus, I guess, against different departments in retail? You're saying about people having their head in the sand a little bit. So like central ops and, say, customer service. How do you find consensus across that to tackle shrink in stores?
It's a challenge. It'll always be a challenge, because even within the same company, different people in different departments will have conflicting objectives. So if we take the example of you and I, when we work together, your objectives was to take tasks and take colleagues or take roles out of particular functions for efficiency perspective. For me, a lot of the time, those challenge, also those colleagues or those tasks were part of my checks. They were the people that were doing the things to make sure that what was happening in the business it was minimizing the risk. So a lot of the time it is conflicting. For me, the best kind of process that I adopted and adapted was the fact of just working collaboratively. So it would be around getting together, taking the kind of objectives out aside, explaining exactly what my objectives were, how I wanted to do it, and how we could work collaboratively. So I wasn't impacting your objectives, you weren't impacting my objectives, but more importantly is that we could measure the right areas. So it's understanding what exactly it is that you wanted to do. Are there any alternative ways to doing it? Are there any slight amends that you could do? Are there any kind of joint objectives that we could employ to get us to the same place? Because at the end of the day, even when you work in the same company and it is all to the good of that one company, it's sometimes it is just around the education that whilst you are performing a particular task or you want to do a particular project, and at the end of the day it will save X amount in hard numbers, what that's not necessarily bringing into focus is the consequence of that. So yes, okay, that is going to make us far more efficient, but that is going to make us far more vulnerable. That is going to mean that it's not just are we going to have far less checks and measures in that area, but also means it's probably going to make our business far more attractive to professional thieves, to violent thieves, to all that type of thing. That is, that once they're in our stores, will create a whole spectrum of issues. So it's around we're just working collectively and agreeing on common objectives.
Yeah, no, of course, we never had that problem though.
No, I was talking obviously metaphorically, as if we may have.
You raise a good point, because as things like more and more self-service or self-service technology is introduced into stores, which it certainly was when we were there, it does. The argument is there that it opens up the more opportunity to risk for you guys to handle. So actually working together like that as a partnership is absolutely necessary, Marwan. We always agree.
It is, Paul. And sometimes, as you know, we could arrive at a situation whereby, okay, look, we know there's a risk, but it's an acceptable risk. So we'll do this because to the greater good of the company that we're working for, on balance, it makes sense to do it. As long as we are aware of what those risks are, we have measures in place to make sure those risks don't increase, and that, that we're mindful that the overall benefit of doing it is there. As yes, okay, we might lose more money, we might all kinds of things, but overall the advantage of doing it is the right thing to do. So let's do it, but let's do it small. Then let's do it in a couple of stores first, then let's do it in perhaps a region, let's make it bigger, but let's make sure that what we believe is the inherent risk of doing it doesn't increase and become a bigger risk, therefore wipe out the advantage of doing it.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that answers why, if anyone's wondering why we've got barbed wire on there, a little quip that we might say is all LP want to do is close all the doors and not have customers, and everything will be fine. which we know, just for speaking for everybody else on the other side of retail, that's not the general opinion. But
well, as you know, the statement I always used to say whenever I kind of went into these meetings is that if the retailers had their way, all the products would be in the car park with an honesty box. If I had my way, everything would be in a cage in the back of the house with an armed guard. But as retailers, somewhere in the middle we have to meet.
Indeed. So I guess on that though, in your experience, what are the big prizes in stores to uncover when looking at controlling loss?
So the big prizes for controlling loss, it's not just, for me, it's almost through my kind of like 30 odd years within doing this. When I first started doing security, it was all about stop the money hemorrhaging out of the business, stop the money hemorrhaging out of the business. That's all the kind of focus was. Things have moved on massively from that. And I would say that these days, the more important factor in reducing shrink is by reducing shrink, you're not only is it the financial bit, but you're increasing the safety of the customers and colleagues. That is the big focus of any retailer with a conscience these days, is the fact of, are my customers and are my colleagues safe in a business? And one of the biggest enablers of that is to make sure that people with criminal intent are not within the business. So that is, for me, that is one of the biggest gains. If you've got a controlled business with its finger on the pulse in relation to everything, and people in the right place monitoring, managing, and measuring that, then that has to be the big win for any business. Because if you are maximizing your sales, maximizing your profits with happy colleagues in a nice environment, what more do you need?
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you. Well, I think that feels to me, Chris, like it's a great time maybe to go to some of the Q&A. But thank you, Andrew.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Andrew. I think that's been very worthwhile. We have had a few questions come in. The first one that arrived very, very early was from Brand Elveston. Now, thank you very much, Brand, for joining. And I realise you may have struggled to decode some of the English that was being spoken, but I appreciate you sticking with it. So the Brand's question, Andrew, is that is there more theft or is there more operational loss when it comes to the key contributors to shrink? And also for bonus points, what do you estimate the percentage of each contribution to be?
Okay, well, firstly, hello, Brand. Hope you're well, my friend. Again, depends on on the business that you're in. From a grocery perspective, there was always talk about for a long time the kind of rough estimates and all the kind of the studies had shown that from a process was roughly 80 to 75%, with theft creating the rest of it. I think it's probably fair to say that there's definitely general acceptance in this country in particular that through numerous reasons, so that being, that there's not the same amount of investment within colleagues, management, all that sort of thing within stores. There's far less people in stores working now than there ever was previously. That added to the fact of whether we like it or not, and I know there's an awful lot of work going on to try and face into it and rebalance the kind of consequences through the judicial system in relation to thieves. But there's still the general acceptance that the loss through theft has definitely gone up. And it's only my belief, and it's only through kind of my experience as well, but I would probably put the balance more now around probably 60-40 in favour of process.
Do you have any thoughts on that, Paul, from your experience or your?
I think
do you have any thoughts?
Everyone expects. I think. Well, Andrew certainly have a closer eye to what from the data. I guess he could see operationally from when we worked together. I think from the time we've seen when at SciWatch, the video feeds and things like that we've seen in stores, I think there was an expectation that there was going to be a rise due to the lockdowns and things like that, and pressures on people with furlough and whatever else. I was surprised at the amount of theft going through checkouts, and this certainly isn't a plug. This isn't that forum for that, but there was a general, I guess, assumption that sweethearting wasn't a thing. And from an operations point of view, I would be always very aware that checkouts didn't scan things as well as people thought. And a lot of my time was spent making sure people had the right maintained printers or barcodes were right and things like that, because that's, again, a whole other world of loss that nothing to do with theft. But I think I was surprised at the amount we saw, certainly through the start of the years, where there still is theft in stores, and certainly through, as Andrew says, through staff as well, more than we thought it would be there.
Okay, so we've had a couple of questions in from Adrian, who you mentioned earlier, Paul. He is in, and is obviously eagerly listening, attentively listening to what's going on here. The question is for you, Andrew, is nice to see you again, he says. You mentioned the 3 M's. If you begin to measure the cause of shrink, brackets unknown loss, should it not then be redefined as known loss?
Yeah, that's the kind of question I expect from Adrian, because he's the clever person that he is. Yes, it should, if you know where it's been lost from, is my take on it. Because just because you may know that something has gone, if you do not know the exact reasons for that, should it be classed as known shrink or not? I'm not so sure. For me, known shrink should only be if you know exactly what it is and exactly the cause. And I think particularly in the grocery field, and don't get me wrong, we know the grocery sector is very much split into experts in process and experts in the security side. And I always fell into the latter, not so much the process side of it. But I think unless you know exactly where, when, and what it is that went, I'm not so sure you can class it as known shrink.
And I think, from our side, that's I was a bit of a problem solver through my career, so it almost irks me that we still talk about unknown loss. As Adrian, I guess, an expert in that, so I'm not going to profess to go into the detail that Adrian will be able to. That's the point, really. I think I'd look at something and think, well, that's unknown, and people are just kind of brushing it under the carpet, to your point before, Andrew. Well, why wouldn't we? So if technology can help bring that to light now and turn it into known loss, fantastic, because then hopefully it can be managed.
Yeah, exactly.
And then as a follow-up from Adrian is, let's see how, we've only got 18 minutes left on this call. I just want to throw this out to you, Andrew, but the follow-up question is, as grocery retailers increasingly aim to have 80% of their transactions go through self-scan, what could possibly go wrong?
I think just for the wider audience, you probably won't know that Adrian and I have spent a very long time, trying to work out exactly what the risk is and quantify the risk and loss through self-scan. So I think we've always been pretty much on the same page. And whilst it may not be a popular answer, my belief is the fact of both through criminal and lack of adherence to proper process and lack of focus in that area, I think we currently will never know the true extent of what happens to that area. I still believe, I'm still a firm believer in the fact of, whilst we know there is a degree, which is, whilst it's very much been narrowed and we have much more of a handle on it, whilst there is a degree of theft through the self-checkouts, for me, I personally believe that the bigger impact on shrink and the bigger contributor to shrink are people and processes that go nowhere near the point of sale.
I'm going to add one in there because I can't understand, but thank you, Adrian, for that. I remember, Adrian, you costing me money in my business case, which was a positive thing because we had to come to an agreement with Andrew of how much that should be, but it was one of the first times we're all collaboratively working where you see ops and loss working together to create a result for a piece of new technology. And it does have to be recognised that there's risk. And if you can put a number on that, like you're saying, through calculating what that could be, you can get a measure and you can test it. One of the things I wanted to ask, actually, if that's all right, Chris, I'll drop one in, was around, you touched on before about people knowing where who's got technology? Or are you showing somebody, look, we've got CCTV in here and you're going to get caught? Do thieves get to know who's a soft touch? We see a lot of kind of, should we say, regulars, who seem to be regular offenders, same kind of products, same kind of areas in stores. Do retailers realise this, or do thieves get to know who a soft touch is, who hasn't got protection?
Yeah, without a doubt. But whether that changes their strategy is questionable. There's, again, just from my time that I spent with the University in the North, and I suppose through my experience, where we have in the past as well, we have done different initiatives when people have been arrested within our stores with various companies. We have asked them the question. So whilst they're in the holding room, or whilst they're within our custody, we have asked them questions. And surprisingly, not all of them were prepared to help you, but a surprising amount of people were prepared to just very simple questions around why us, what makes it attractive, all that sort of thing. So we might actually get a lot of intelligence that way. So I think it's kind of split. So even if you take the habitual thieves, so I'm not talking about the professional thieves who are slicker, cleverer, will go for the bigger bucks. So we're talking about people who come in and grabbing bottles of vodka, or grabbing meat, or grabbing some electrical items. To them, my experience has taught me that it's mixed. So yes, out of a choice, they will go to someone that is far less protected than others. And a lot of the time, it will be as simple as, if they think they're store detectives, they won't go there because they don't want to get involved with store detectives, which again, it goes to show that a lot of things in this business are cyclical. So, all companies had store detectives kind of from the 70s through to kind of probably into the new millennium. Then they went out of fashion. But no, most retailers have re-employed store detectives because there's a massive deterrent value in having them there. But in some cases, Paul, it'll be as simple as they will go to their nearest store. They might know that there's increased risk because you've got guards, you've got CCTV, you've got analytics, you've got trolley locks, you've got everything going there, but they don't care. It doesn't matter. I'm not going to go on a bus to go to the one down the road because it's easier. You're on my doorstep, I'm coming in. So it's kind of mixed. But yes, I can remember one of the thieves saying to me, which really stuck home with me. He said, if you guys think you have a really good intelligence network, trust me, it's nowhere near as good as ours.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, speaking from my own experience, I spent 10 years sitting as a magistrate in the UK, and so I would see the ones that were caught, and you'd see a lot of faces over and over again, and you'd see their name on the list, and you'd have a picture of what had happened. But I always say this quite quietly: some of the routines that they work out together, even the ones that we're seeing in court, are really quite impressive. And it's very hard not to be, to think, wow, if only you could use this for good. Imagine if we could harness this for positiveness. Are there any incidents, and again, without the specifics, but are there any kinds of things that you've seen that you've just thought, wow, that's really impressive. That's next level stuff.
I mean, there are, Chris, but they were probably more on the kind of the real intelligence, organized criminal gang style kind of thieving. That sometimes you do begrudgingly. I have to kind of go to your captain and go, fair play. You've understood. You've looked exactly at the business model. You've understood where the loopholes and the weaknesses are. You've devised a system to circumvent that, and you profited from it. And whilst you obviously you're going to be very much against what they're doing, there is a begrudging admiration of what they've done. From the kind of day-to-day people, you're right, it is just the kind of diversionary tactics they will have. So they will send somebody into a shop that looks like, it's almost like they're wearing a striped jumper, a bag and a mask, because they know that the analytics, the man on the front door, everybody else will be watching them, whilst there's a team of other people who just look like you and I will be in pillaging everything else, while everybody else is watching the comic strip thief go around. So yeah, I've seen loads of things down to the very basic, setting fire alarms off, doing everything they possibly can. So whilst I always used to say, that nothing surprises me anymore, something always used to happen that surprised me. I go, God, how the hell do they think they're doing that? So there's a whole new day's conference in that, Chris, rather than just a quick answer.
Once, just to kind of follow on, I guess, once you've seen the real surprising one, how quickly can you kind of fix that loophole that they've? Has that always been easy, or have you had to walk disbelieving people through what happened?
No. Again, depending on what it is. If it's a physical weakness, they're usually quite easily quick to fix. If again, going back to very early on as we're talking about, if there's a company acceptance of an issue and therefore the kind of ability and the access to the appropriate level of budget to fix those things is there, then that's great. Sometimes, as Paul will know, there's something they will find a loophole in the POS system. And that is not so easy to fix because you are fixing a problem which takes a lot of tech time. It then becomes a global fix, not a local fix. Even though it's something as simple as highlighting something on refunds, can take a long time to fix. But the point is, once you've got once you understand that and you know where the red flag is, you can monitor it. So you can measure and monitor those issues, keep it going. So the answer is varied. Physically, quite quick to fix. If it's a process or a system issue, it may take a bit longer.
That's excellent. Well, I think we may have, unless there are any other questions from the audience, I think we may have, or from you, Paul. I know you often have a little something up your sleeve for the last minute just to keep us all on our toes.
Actually, there is one that's just come in again from Adrian, but there is one from our very own son from our team, which we kind of touched on. He's been more specific, though, I guess, with any rough idea where the theft is between the checkout and the store. Where the theft is between the checkout and the store? Between checkouts and store, yeah.
But in percentage terms, I think, Andrew, I think there's...
No, sorry, I don't. Again, I think that would depend on the nature and the form of retailer. I don't know. I wouldn't. I don't know, and I would like to hazard a guess on that. Sorry.
That's fair enough. So Adrian's third question is: he'll be writing a paper on you, Andrew. This is something that we're all looking forward to.
Another paper on me.
I mean, e-commerce is a big focus area, and obviously the pandemic that we're not mentioning has been a huge fillip to online retail, and there's all sorts of fraud and new behaviors, which obviously require new skill sets and probably new technologies to challenge. Do you have any, what do you think about the rise in e-commerce and the effect it will have, I guess, on loss prevention?
Yeah, no, Adrian's spot on with that. So, as the focus of retail in general, it's taken a big sideward step or development step towards e-com. So is crime. Again, especially the clever crime will start moving or has moved that way, and it will get better and better. I've not been at the kind of sharp edge for 12 months now, but I know certainly in my previous employment that was very much our big focus. So we were starting to understand where the red flags are, where the loopholes are, where the indicators are that are telling us that these particular issues are happening, and we had developed a dashboard to start to demonstrate the size of the issue and where back to who, where, when, why, exactly where that was happening. So I would expect the vast majority of focus to be heading in that direction now, because, as I said, as businesses move in that way, so will crime move that way. But it's equally important that once you're doing that, with your resource, that you don't take your eye off the ball as well with what's happening in the shop floor, because whilst the focus is moving towards the e-com side of it, some people will take advantage of exactly of that and realise that perhaps you're taking your eye off the ball with what's happening in traditional bricks and mortar retail and start taking advantage of loopholes in that area.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, because stores are not going to be closed forever, and once they open up again in a large scale and a kind of across all of the resale offerings, and people are going in habitually wearing masks, or actually now having a reason why they would want to wear a mask, then that is going to maybe draw resources back into the shop floor. That's a great point.
Yeah.
Right. Well, I think that brings us to a nice smooth close. I think we can give everybody 5 minutes back in their day. Thank you very, very much, Andrew. It's been great listening to you. I'm seeing a lot of love and appreciation on various WhatsApp and LinkedIn channels as well. So thank you very much for your time. We really appreciate it. Paul, it's a pleasure as always. Thank you, everybody, for coming along and attending. We will be doing many, many more of these events. If anybody in the audience, or you know somebody who might be interested in coming and sharing their experience, as Andrew has done today, or coming and talking about a specific subject, then we have the group on LinkedIn. Type the word Unshrink into LinkedIn and it will take you straight to our group. We will also be chopping this up and pushing it out as little podcast segments. So please look out for us all around the place, and we'll let you know when the future events are scheduled. Thank you all very much for your time. Have a good day.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you. Bye-bye.